are listening to the Lingerie Success Podcast, the first podcast of its kind committed to practical and actionable marketing strategies, business advice, interviews, and tools to help your lingerie store thrive. Are you ready? So let's get started.
Hello, Lingerie Success listeners, and welcome to episode 7 of the Lingerie Success Podcast. And for our new listeners out there, welcome. We are so excited to have you here with us today. And on the podcast, I am one of your hosts. My name is Katie, and I have Kris and Angel with me here today. They host with me every week on our podcast. And I wanted to introduce them to anyone who might not know who Kris and Angel are from not listening to our past podcasts. So, Kris, why don't you tell our new listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, thank you, Katie. Well, I'm the head of marketing here at Parfait. I love, working on the marketing inbound and talking about marketing in general. I think it would be good for our listeners to listen to episode 0, where we sort of talk about who we are and why we started this podcast in the first place. So, that's all that's about me.
Well, thank you. And Angel, I have Angel here with me today too. And Angel, why don't you say hello and a little bit about yourself?
Good morning, everyone. And I'm Angel, and I'm the producer of the show. Basically all the behind the scenes tech stuff, setting up the video, the recording. My main job here is as a web developer, but anything that's tech related that can support the team, I'm there ready to go.
Don't forget hair and makeup, Angel.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. I have a hidden YouTube makeup tutorial channel. Don't talk about
it. Well, I promise we won't share that in the show notes. So as I said, my name is Katie. I am the chief content creator at Parfait. I love what I do here. And I manage both the Parfait blog and the Lingerie Success blog. So today, our subject, producing content your customers will love, is very, very near and dear to my heart. And I am so excited to talk about this today, as I know Kris and Angel are too. So we thought that we would dive right into it. I wanted to chat with Kris and see maybe what the key to producing content your customers will love is.
Yeah, well, we talked about this on the previous podcast. We stressed the importance of knowing your ideal customer. I think knowing your audience is the key differentiator in any content that you produce. With the exercise of knowing your customers, we're able to know what their problems are, what their needs are, what solutions we can provide to them. And solutions are not always a product or a specific service, but it can be the content that we produce. Here in Parfait, for example, we know that, after we studied our target audience, we know that they consume content 8 to 10 every single day. And they love blogs, images, and they read comments on social media. So we know that, and they also have a strong desire to provide for their families. They have a desire to take care of themselves, but as well play it safe. With that in mind, we're able to develop the content that is most relevant to them. One thing that I'm very proud of in the last, I would say 6 months or so since we've engaged in this content marketing, inbound marketing, is the traffic that we've gotten has shot up almost 2,000%. And that's incredible growth within the last 6 months or so. But what I'm most proud of is when I look at the quality of the page views, the visits that we get. We get page views that are, compared to industry standards, are double or triple the amount of times that people spend on a specific website. The amount of pages that they consume, the amount of content that they read on our website is high. And I just checked recently, it's even higher than CNN, even higher than Yahoo. And what that tells us is, if we're producing content that targets our consumers or our key audience, it will allow us to drive not only traffic, but also quality. So I think that's the number one key in producing content that your customers or consumers will love.
I love that, Kris. And I just wanted to add, when you were speaking, it's so true that your audience is hungry for content, and that's why they consume so many pages on our website. And we have spent so much time getting to know our target demographic, our customers, really living, in their world. And that's something that we try to reflect on our website. And when you really, really know your customers, it's so much easier to create content that they'll love, because you're already knowing what their pain points are, what their interests are, what their needs are. So it just makes it so much easier when you're going to Facebook, when you're going to your blog, and you're creating that content, because you're able to address those questions that your customers are asking.
Absolutely.
And we wanted to talk a little bit about goals. So I love setting goals. I know that the goals are definitely important when it comes to content creation. But Kris, why would you say that it's so important to establish goals before you start content creation?
Yeah, well, let me give you a little bit of a statistic that I just recently read. It says 54 out of 100 shoppers admit that they would stop shopping at a retailer store that doesn't provide them with relevant content.
Wow.
This means that there's no way around it, right? You must produce engaging content or risk losing significant chunk of your customer base. The great thing for our retailers is that content marketing is available today if we produce engaging, shareable, and post consistently. We all know that, going back to the goals, we all know that before we travel to anywhere, we have to know our destination so we can map out our strategies, our path to get to that destination. And the goal is exactly that, is exactly the destination that we are trying to get with our content marketing, with our reach and all that stuff. I'm not sure if you or maybe a lot of our listeners know Roger Bannister. He was an English runner back in 1950s. He was the first one who broke the 4-minute mile. Before 1954, running a mile within 4 minutes was unheard of. It's like, that's impossible. That's like reaching the moon. It was never thought that it could be done. But he set out a goal that he would break that. And what he did was he broke that mile into quarter miles, and he kept breaking that. When he was able to break, every mile quarter at a time, then he knew exactly that he would be able to break the quarter mile. The 1 minute mile. And that's exactly what he did. But the crazy thing about that was once he did, many other people did right after him, kept breaking it, and they were setting new world records. And before he did that, everybody thought it was impossible. So I think by allowing ourselves to set the goals, it gives us the opportunity to figure out and break that, that strategy into chunks that we can manage and we can consume every day to be able to get to that content goal that we have. It's also an important point to remember that your consumers will identify with stores and brands that speak to them. Like we discussed in the previous podcast, we're constantly bombarded, and I'm sure some of our retailers will attest to this, that we're bombarded by sales-driven content, which causes our consumers to sort of abandon us or ignore us or maybe shut us down for a little bit. In a recent book that I just finished, which I highly recommend in my personal podcast, is Disrupt You by Jay Samit. He shares a story about Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones, if you're very familiar with it. There was a scene there where Indy was challenged to a sword duel by an Arabian sword fighter. What he did was alarming. He pulled out a gun and shot the guy. What that did was it changed the game. It disrupted everything. Now, sword fighting was no longer relevant, right? And that's sort of what content can do for us. It's sort of our disruptor. It's sort of our gun in a sword fight. It allows us to cut through the noise, cut through the salesy messages and all that stuff to be able to deliver impactful value to our consumers. And that's why it's important that we do plan out our goals so that we can develop a strategy to achieve those goals with our content marketing plan.
I love that, Kris. And as you were speaking, I was thinking back to yesterday, actually. I was listening to this amazing HubSpot live talk. And it was, the speaker was a woman who had written a book on disruption. And I will see if I can find it to link that in the show notes for our listeners.
Was it Whitney Johnson?
It might have been.
Yeah, she also wrote a book like that. I haven't read that book, but that's part of my book list.
Yeah, it might have been. But what she said was amazing. And one of the things that she said that really stuck with me is she mentioned that with disruption comes discomfort. But it's good to embrace the discomfort. It might be uncomfortable at first to create content when you're not used to it, but that's a good thing. It's good to be uncomfortable sometimes, and that just means that you're growing and that you're evolving and that your content is evolving as well.
Absolutely.
So I thought that was really cool. I'll see if I can find that for you guys, though, because that was a really, really good talk.
Yeah, if you do, please put it on the show notes as well. I think our listeners would benefit highly from that.
Absolutely. And then I also wanted to talk a little bit about when Kris was speaking about making sure that your goals are doable, essentially. That's why we suggest setting goals before you start creating your content, because you might find that you only have maybe 30 minutes, an hour and a half to dedicate each week. And with creating content, it can be as it can take as much time as you let it. So if you decide that you want to spend a half hour, then you want to make sure that you maximize that half hour that you spend. So that's another reason why we always suggest establishing goals. It just gives you an idea, and it helps you visualize the finish line before you get there, which always helps. And we wanted to talk a little bit about consistency and publishing new content, especially if you're newer to publishing consistent content. Kris, what are some suggestions that you would have for consistency?
Well, that's a tough question, but it's a very important thing. We find that, we need to find what content channel works for our business, for our consumers, where they're living, where they're consuming all this content. And again, I hark on that important point of understanding and knowing your audience very, very well. Because when we do that, we know that we can be able to produce regularly for them. And, whether this is throughout the day when we have a free time, like you mentioned earlier, sometimes the 30 minutes, the hour, a week can be broken down into, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. I know when I write an article, sometimes, I get an idea. I just kind of outline my idea. And throughout the week, as I'm gaining more experience, as I'm reading stuff, as I'm going through life, I keep adding to that. And before I publish it, I sort of review the content that I just put together and see if some of the notes may not drive together and sort of edit it that way. So you can also do that when you're developing content. But the important thing is to do it consistently. Like for us, producing a lot of content like we do here at Parfait is a very big challenge for us. We're all busy doing the work that we do on a day-to-day basis, and developing content is just added on top of that, which I'm sure a lot of our retailers and store owners and employees will attest to. They're busy working on their business. But I think it's important that we not only work in our business, but work on our business, right? That's why the content production and consistently doing it is very, very important, because it allows us to develop a communication between us and also our consumers. If you choose to blog weekly, that works. You could do that. I know I hear often that it's very hard to produce content, but our listeners should understand that if you're sharing your expertise, it shouldn't be that easy. It shouldn't be that hard, because think about it. How easy would it be is, when a customer comes to you and asks you, hey, my straps are constantly digging into my shoulders. I'm sure if one of our retailers or their team members hear that, they'll have the urge to solve that problem, right? They'll know exactly what to do. If the customers say, oh, throughout the day, my bra keeps riding up. Hey, that's a bad issue. So there's just expertise that are locked into the brains and experiences of our retailers that they can just talk about. And when you're talking about those specific topics, I don't think it's going to be hard for them to produce content. That would not take them 5 to 10 minutes to tell you exactly what you need to do. And that's the content that their consumers are wanting. And that's the content that they need to develop. So the consistency of being able to do that, I think, should be very easy for our retailers to know.
Absolutely. And I also wanted to mention with consistency, it's setting the time that works best for you. So if you have a blog for your store and you're posting Tuesday and Thursday at, maybe 9 or 10 in the morning, schedule your posts ahead of time. If you're using WordPress, for example, you can schedule them. And that way you're delivering your customers consistent content on the same days every week, because they'll come back to your website, they'll subscribe to your newsletter. They're looking for that consistency as well in regards to when you post. So that's always a good idea that I always recommend. And then also last week in episode 6, we talked a little bit about blogging within Facebook. And we're huge fans of blogging within Facebook. I looked up the terms. I wasn't able to find an exact term for it yet. I'm sure there is one out there, but for now, we're considering it mini blogging. So it's basically just blogging within Facebook, because it's not necessarily microblogging, because when you think of microblogging, you think of Twitter, you think of a short status update on Facebook, but this is a little bit longer. This is a cross between a status update, so maybe 1 to 2 sentences about your store and a sale or promotion, and then between a blog post. So actually putting out a piece of content that is maybe anywhere from usually 300 to 500 words. So definitely consider blogging within Facebook as well. That's an amazing platform. And then be sure before you do to check out our episode 6, because we talk a little bit about it there. And I think you'll find that podcast beneficial for blogging. And we also wanted to talk a little bit about do's and don'ts for content creation. Kris, I know that you have some really good do's and don'ts that you'd like to share with us.
Absolutely. Well, I think staying relevant to your brand or store makes a big difference. You know what makes you unique. We talked about this in a previous podcast, knowing your USP, right? And that's the key to be able to deliver the content and the communication to your consumers that they will find relevant, that speaks to their needs, speaks to their problems, and you're sort of the hero that provides that solution. But in producing content, we need to stay away from contents that are, maybe too sensitive for our audience. That's something that you have to develop for yourself, or you have to find out for yourself, depending on who your consumers are. If, for example, I had a little interview with Lingerie Journal yesterday, and we talked about this particular topic, and this question was raised, and I told them that if your particular consumer is engaged in sensitive conversations, then maybe that is the conversation that you need to have. If your consumers are not engaged on social media whatsoever, you really need to be honest about this. But if they're engaged, for example, in water cooler conversations or conversations across the street in a forum or in another store, that's where you need to be engaging with them. And the content that they're wanting to talk about is it's the content that you want to be able to engage in. And then you can then find a way to track that back into your business and the topics that you will find that you're giving the most value to your consumers. I also wanted to touch on, I read a book recently called Contagious by Jonah Berger. He's a professor. That book was so eye-opening for me as well in producing content. And in the last video that we've just produced for Mother's Day, we sort of used that formula to see, that was our stepping stone, right? To see if those ideas would work. And he talks about his formula steps. Basically, the steps is social currency, viral content needs triggers, emotions, provide practical value, publicly viewable when you're consuming them, and it should be wrapped in a story. And these are the formulas and things that he found that cause things to go viral, right? And within this, when he talked about emotions, he talked about the types of content that evoke emotion. He said that we should stick to content that are high arousal. It could be negative, like anger or anxiety, if it evokes that emotion, or positive, where it provides awe, excitement, amusement. But we also need to avoid low arousal emotions, just as contentment and sadness. If the content that we're producing excites people, gives them a aha moment, like, oh, I should have known about that. These are the type of content that they're more likely to find value in and consume, and then maybe share with a friend, share with their mom, share with a sister, or whatever audience they would find your content to be relevant to. But if you produce content that are just more of the same, stuff that they find everywhere else, then what's the point of sharing and consuming your content from then on? With this in mind, it gives us the building blocks of what to do when we're producing content. There's a lot of don'ts that we should avoid, but I think those are common sense. But I think this sort of provides a building block for us to be able to develop relevant, unique, and valuable content that our consumers will love.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely. And I think you're right, Kris. And you just have to find what is relevant to your audience. And if it is something that's a little bit more sensitive, then you speak to it. If it's something that your brand and your business does represent. And just knowing exactly what your audience is hungry for and what they're looking for, and then just answering their questions. And a lot of the information that you might provide in a blog post or through content, like Kris said, it could definitely be customer questions, and also, don't hesitate to reach out to your staff, your employees, and see if maybe they'd be interested in writing for you as well. Sometimes the people that we work with have interests in writing that we might not know about, and maybe they are a really great communicator and they can help get your message across. And as an advocate looking internally, sometimes that's the best option, to find those great brand ambassadors that really understand your questions, your message, and they can help answer some of those questions with you.
Absolutely. I did want to touch on some of the benefits of blogging, and what we always get stuck on this and how we can come up with blog topics, right? We all know that consumers don't shop the way they used to. And I think we're all aware of that. We live in a digital era now. The common thing is we think that to survive, we need to start selling online, right? When we think about the digital era and to compete. But as local businesses, the key here is, in my opinion, is to kind of bridge the online and offline world to have a cohesive experience, for the target consumers. When we sync their online experience with our content, and then the offline customer service, excellent world-class service that we provide them, plus the products, it sort of brings everything together. The main benefit of blogging is it allows us to have a voice. It allows you to be able to speak to your consumers and communicate to them, to be heard when sometimes even it's not physically available. When you're sleeping, your store is not open, you're still able to solve problems for your consumers that, they would have waited for your store to be open to be able to get those answers. And you're able to leave lasting value for your consumers that they can receive when they're ready to do so. I think we live in an on-demand world. Netflix, Hulu, and all this stuff is, I consume my television when I want to. I think the same is true with our content. This is what we need to be able to evolve to, in being able to produce and provide content at the pace of our consumers and at the pace that they want to consume it. We also want to talk about trying to come up with ideas. I think it's common when we're starting to produce content. At first, we're excited. We have a lot to talk about. The topics that Lingerie Success just talked about, straps, digging in, and stuff like that. I can produce content like that. Absolutely. But after a while, that well is going to start to dry up. And then you'll find yourself, then posting inconsistently, then questioning, should I continue to do this or not? But an easy practice that I want to suggest to everybody is every day you encounter customers. Every day what you should do is write 3 problems that you encountered every single day. If it's a bra fitting issue, it could be a panty issue. We don't never talk about that. Or it could be a bustier that maybe a bride is trying to look for, what fits them. Whatever that is, write it down. Just 3 every single day for the next 30 days. Imagine you will never run out of content for the rest of your life, because if you do this practice on a daily basis, you have a notebook, or you can have a box of Post-it notes with just, what am I going to talk about today? Let me pull out a special card. Oh, let's talk about topic A, topic B, topic C. So, and if you do this, make this a practice every day, content flow, content production will just be a breeze for you. So I just wanted to touch on those few things.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kris, for touching on those topics. And I think also with blog topics, sometimes you get so excited about posting your ideas and you want to answer all of the questions. And that's why we always suggest establishing your goals beforehand. And I would also add to have an editorial calendar. So it can be something that's really simple. I use one that's in Excel. It's very basic. It just says the blog title, post, the content, and the date. And it gives you an idea so that if you are busy that one day, like say you're posting on a Tuesday and a Thursday and you don't have time Tuesday morning to write, that you have that content ahead of time and you have that plan. So you're always prepared. And I also, when you're looking for blog topics as well, I love the idea of just looking into your store and maybe doing a comparison post of strapless bras, maybe talking about, you have 3 favorites, talking about the benefits of each. Maybe you have a really unique style that isn't carried in another store locally. Maybe you can talk about that. So customers, they love reviews. They love extra information. If there's something that you can provide that's not in the product details for the item, or if you don't have an e-commerce site, isn't listed on your website, and you're talking about it on your blog or in Facebook, and just making sure that you speak to the benefits of every single product in your store, your customers will love that. They'll love that additional information. And when you're looking online and you're still in the consideration stage and you're not sure if you want to drive down to the store, you're considering a trip to the store, sometimes it's a good idea to have that content, because that can drive an additional trip to your store, that can create a customer who's excited about your product. So that's another reason why we suggest blogging, and not only blogging, but just creating content, whether it's on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, whichever is your favorite, wherever your customers live. That's another reason why we always suggest it. And I wanted to share maybe one of Kris's best tips for content creation. What is it, Kris?
Well, I think the best tip is content is not, let me repeat that. I think one of the best things to get out of this podcast is blogging is not the only way to communicate to your consumers. There's infographics. If you're comfortable with video, if you're comfortable with audio, if you're comfortable with microblogging like you were suggesting, or it could be answering questions for your consumers, maybe a local forum that you do locally with other stores that have the same content as you or the same target audience as you. I think the most important thing is we need to deliver tailored, relevant content to our audience and make it unique. Consumers are, like we said earlier, are constantly bombarded by content. And it's up to us to produce content that they will find value in. If we want them to be interested in us and stick it out with us, we need to be able to provide useful, valuable, unique content that they can consume every single day. I think that's the number one tip that I would have for our listeners.
I love that, useful content that they can consume every single day. That's so important for all of our readers. And really, at the end of the day, you want your content to be practical. You want it to be actionable, so you want them to come to your store. And you want it to be good advice. And the information that you provide in whichever platform you choose, as long as you're helping out your customers and solving pain points, you'll definitely be creating content your customers love. And for all of our listeners, we did have some homework for you today. So Kris mentioned a little bit earlier about listening 30 days to your customers' questions, their concerns, taking 3 of those each day, and then creating content out of those questions. So that is our homework, our challenge for you this week and this month. And we would love for you to write 3 questions that arise during the day and ask your staff to do the same. So have your staff share some of those questions with you. Maybe there's something a little bit more unique. Maybe there's something common, but all are good questions that there's definitely an audience out there online that is hungry and looking for answers. And then in the next 30 days, so with those 3 questions a day for 30 days, you should have 90 unique topics that you can talk, write, or develop content about. So 90 topics. That's crazy.
Yeah, it is.
But it just shows that, if you're doing it consistently day after day, that you'll have that content. It builds. And one of the great things about this is that these are the questions, the answers that your customers really want to know. So this is stuff that's very, very relevant to your store, to your customer base, and hopefully to your target demographic as well. And then, as Kris mentioned, if you practice this regularly, you'll never run out of content ideas. So if you're doing 3 a day for 30 days and you keep doing that for the year, think about how many questions you'll have. That's crazy, Kris.
Yeah, that is.
And we also wanted to leave you with a question of the day as well. So our question for you, what is the best investment you've made in your business in the last year?
Perfect. That's a great question to have.
So it can be something as simple as maybe a system that you installed. Maybe you decided to take an extra 15 minutes to spend some time online each day. So whichever your best investment is that you made in your business, we'd love to hear it.
Absolutely. I'd also like to invite our listeners to visit lingeriesuccess.com, to access more episodes, articles, and tips. And I also encourage them to join the community on Facebook, Lingerie Success. You can just look for it on Facebook to connect with us and other store owners, to share tips, advice, and what's working for your business that helps you thrive. We have a link on our show notes to this. And please do share, subscribe, leave a rating and review. We really appreciate your honest feedback because it helps us continually provide impactful content that we hope you'll find valuable.
Yes, thank you so much, Kris, for mentioning that. And as always, thank you all for joining us. And I wanted to send a special thanks to Kris and Angel as well for being here and co-hosting with me every week. And I am so thankful for you guys being here and thankful for our audience. And we'll see you guys all next week.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys.
This podcast is brought to you by Parfait. For more information, show notes, and downloads, please go to www.lingeriesuccess.com.